recording. Yeah. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone to week 6. We're gonna do Node and Express this week. So it's the first tutorial on the back end. So yeah, let's get started. So what is Node? Node is essentially an open source JavaScript runtime that allows you to execute JavaScript outside of the browser. So what it allows you to do is essentially write JavaScript and then execute them outside the browser. That's essentially how it works. And there are several really large companies that use it: Uber, Netflix, PayPal, eBay. I'm sure there's a bunch of others. So it's a very, very popular tool. And the difference between Node and the browser is that in the browser, the primary interaction object is the Windows object, and for Node, it's the process object. So if you look in the browser DevTools, you'll see a Windows object if you just type in window, and this object contains everything that you use on a regular basis when you're writing JavaScript on the browser, and this includes the console object, and inside the console object there's the log method, right? So everything that you write, every sort of native thing that you are using are in this Windows object. But Node does not have that because Node is not on the browser. So Node, what it has is the process object, and the process object represents the actual process that's running when you're running a JavaScript file. And a process is essentially a running program. And so there are only slight differences between Node and JavaScript on the browser. So for JavaScript on the browser, it's primarily used for DOM manipulation and user interfaces. There is no file system access because the browser doesn't allow you to do that. And it has limited environment control. Whereas for Node, it's primarily used for server-side programming and backend stuff, which is why we're learning it right now. It has the full ability to access the user's file systems and operating system processes, and full environment control. So essentially, Node allows you to treat JavaScript like how you would treat any other programming languages like Python or Java. So I'm going to go over that in a bit. So let's raise your hand if you have Node installed. Okay, if you don't have Node installed, just go on Node and you can download Node. And once you finish downloading, if you go to the command line, you'll be able to type in Node, and you'll run the REPL, which is the thing that allows you to type in code. So if you type in Python, for example, you'll have the Python interpreter, and if you type in Node, you have something similar. And in here, you can write regular JavaScript, right? So console log hello, and it prints hello. But we want to actually write actual JavaScript files, so we will actually go back to the repo. And this time, what we're going to do is we're going to try and build a CMS. So we're going to try to build a backend server that serves the content, and the front-end website is going to fetch the content from the backend and render it on the web page. So pretty simple. And to do that, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to name it server. And inside this folder is going to be all the code that is related to the backend, whereas inside this folder is going to be all the code that's related to the front end or the actual website. So inside this folder, I'm going to create something. I'm going to create the first JavaScript file, which is app.js. And inside app.js, I can write my JavaScript, right? So for example, console.log hello world. And I'm not going to attach this JavaScript file to any HTML file because I'm not running it on the browser. So I'm going to go to my terminal, and then I'm going to type in ls. So we have the server website. So what I want, let's go into server. So I'm going to cd into server. And now I have the app.js file. To run a file with Node, simply type in node app.js, right? So the node command, and then you pass the object that you want to, you pass the file that you want to run, and then it prints hello world. So we've just run JavaScript on our computer without needing a browser. So the syntax is basically the same, except that you don't have access to the Windows object. You have access to the process object, right? But it's, for the most part, it's not going to make too big of a difference. So that's Node. So let's actually try and build the CMS, right? So if I go in the curriculum, let's just see. Okay, so to create a Node application, what you need is to first initialize it as a Node application. So right now it works, but we may want to install other stuff, right? We may want to utilize other packages, like for Python there's pip, for Java there's Maven or something like that, and for Node there is NPM. And NPM stands for Node Package Manager, and what it allows you to do is essentially download packages that are written in JavaScript and utilize them in your app. So, yeah, it's a package manager that allows you to manage dependencies. And so I'm going to show you how to initialize that. So if you go into ls folder, I'm going to type in npm init, which stands for initialization. And then it's going to ask a bunch of questions. I'm just going to go with the default for every single one of them. So enter, enter, enter. It doesn't really matter. And then now, once that's done, if I look back on the actual folder, we have one more file, which is package.json. And if you look at this package.json, it shows you all the sort of data related to your application or your package, right? So, for example, the name is server because the folder is named server. There's the version. And if you want to upload your own packages on NPM, this is the data that they will use. And main is the file app.js. And then you have scripts. I'm going to go over this in a bit, but what this allows you to do is essentially run scripts on the command line. And then you have the author and a bunch of description and whatnot. So these are just metadata. You don't have to edit them too much. So to install, once you initialized a Node project, you can actually install stuff, right? So the thing that we're going to install is Express.js. And Express, let me just see if I can find it. Express is a package that allows you to build HTTP web applications. And what HTTP web applications are is essentially servers that serve data via HTTP. And so if I go back, HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And what it is essentially a protocol that computers have to follow to communicate with each other via a network. And the network could be a physical network. But essentially what it allows you to do is send certain sort of requests to a computer saying, I want this specific thing. And then that computer sends back a response with that thing that's being requested. So this is the basic structure of an HTTP request. You don't have to know this, but it's just sort of under the hood. You have the request line, which shows the HTTP verb. I'm going to go over that in a bit. And then the URL, and then the HTTP version, so what you're getting essentially, and then some metadata, so like the host is here, and then a bunch of other metadata like the content type is the JSON, the character set is UTF-8, and then the actual body of the message, which is the sort of the request, the data that you want to sort of embed in your request, right? So this is how an HTTP request is sent. The server sort of like gets this, these text, and then parses them, right? Now, we don't want to do all the heavy lifting of actually parsing through all this and actually reading line by line what they mean. There's actually packages that allows you to do that, and the package that allows you to do that easily is Express. So if you see this post right here, essentially it's one of the HTTP verbs, and there are quite a bit, but the main four is get, post, put, and delete. Get retrieves the data from the server. If you do a get request, you can do it as many times as you want. It won't cause any side effects. It won't change any data. You're just simply reading data. If you're doing a post request, what that means is you're probably putting data in there. So you're adding data on there. And so the first request is not going to have the same effect as the second request. Whereas get, no matter how many times you request it, it's not going to cause any side effects. Put is to update an existing data, and delete is to delete an existing data. And when I say data, I mean either data that's stored on the server, on the computer, or like an external database, right, that the client can interact with. And when I say these verbs, when they do certain things like get, like reads, and post, like sort of submits, what I mean is this is sort of the protocol that's followed. Do you have to follow it? No, but it's the convention that people follow so people don't get confused. There's like a protocol on the front end and the back end, and they sort of follow that protocol so they don't get confused. But you don't technically have to follow it. So anyways, the package that allows us to sort of do all this without having to do the manual work is Express. So to install a package in, if you just Google Express.js, they have a website full of documentation, and the command that allows you to install Node packages is npm install. So if I go in my terminal, I make sure that I'm at the directory where the package JSON is, and I do npm install Express. What that'll do is it'll install the package, and now it's done. If I go back, you'll see here a new folder, Node modules. Node modules contains all the files that you've just installed. So all of this is Express.js, as well as all of the other packages that it depends on. It installs it as well. So it's a big, big folder, but you normally just never even have to touch it because it's all the thing that you just installed. So now, before I go any further, Node modules is a gigantic folder that you normally wouldn't want to push onto GitHub. The reason why is because it's just a waste. There's really no need to upload all this to your repository. And the reason why is because they can simply look at the package.json, and you'll see here that there's a new dependencies property, and then there is Express, right? So all you have to do is push the package.json. They clone down your repo. They type in npm install, right, without typing anything. What that will do is it will read the package.json file and then install all the dependencies. And then they'll have their own node modules, right? So there's no need to upload it, and it just extra sort of processing power to upload all those dependencies. And so it's a convention to sort of put in your .git ignore to ignore node modules, the node modules folder. So that'll ignore it so that when I do a git push, it will not track it. And when I look at the git sort of change history, it won't like have a bunch of random things that are just completely irrelevant. So that's the convention. But anyway, so now we installed Express. How do we actually use it? So to use a package, we essentially have to import it. And in JavaScript, or not in JavaScript, in Node, because this is not a thing in the browser, to import packages, you have to do, so I'm going to initialize a variable. I'm going to name it Express. And then I'm going to assign it to require Express. And this required thing here is the import. So I'm importing Express, and then whatever I have, I'm assigning it to the variable Express. And then now I have Express, and Express, of course, I don't know what that does. I have to look in the doc, but to save you some time, Express is essentially, the Express thing is, it's not a constructor, but it's like a function that outputs another object. So to get that object, which is the actual server, I'm going to do const app equals to Express, right? Express is a function. And then now, so app is the actual server. And then now with this server, I can actually start listening to requests. So if I do app dot, and you see here a bunch of functions, I'm going to use listen. And then the first variable is the port at which it listens to. And a port is essentially a point at which a computer can receive network requests. And so the convention is 3000, but you can really put anything you want as long as it doesn't conflict with any other ports that the computer is already using. But to just, by convention, 3000 is typically used for development purposes. So you can do 3001, you can do 6000, it doesn't really matter. I would not recommend going lower though, because lower ones are typically being used. So I would recommend going like over 3000. So anyways, 3000, and at most you'll have like maybe 3 things at most running. So you really don't need that many ports. So anyways, 3000, and the next parameter is the callback function that will be called when it successfully listens, when it successfully starts listening. So I'm just going to make this an arrow function, and I'm going to say, because it's successfully called or listening, I'm just going to say listening at port 3000, right? So when it successfully listens, it's going to call this callback function. So I'm going to run it. So node app.js, and you'll see here that it just sort of stops because it's listening. So it's saying listening at port 3000, and currently my computer is listening at port 3000. And In fact, I'm pretty sure you can request, if you know my IP, you can actually make a request on my computer right now. But in any case, I'm listening at port 3000, but it doesn't really actually do anything. And it currently just stops right now because it's listening. To stop it from listening, I do Control-C, which sends a basically a request through the terminal to tell the process to stop running. So it stops running. And so that's how you would sort of stop the process from running. So right now it doesn't actually do anything. It just listens to the port. But right now I can't actually request the server and get anything, right? Because I didn't specify anything. So to specify that I want to maybe serve some data, I'm going to say, okay, if you do a GET request on the root of the root URL. So I'm going to do app.get, and the first parameter is the URL of the request, which is the root URL /. And then the second parameter is the callback function that takes in two objects, a request object and a response object. And then I'm going to make this a arrow function. So now I have the request object and the response object. And maybe I can just log the request object just to see what it is. And then with the response object, I can use it to actually give a response. So I don't actually return anything. I have to use the response. So I'm going to do res dot, maybe just do a send, which sends essentially text. So I'm going to say res.send, you requested the root, or you requested / or whatever, it doesn't matter. So it's going to send back that text to whoever requested the root URL on this server. So I'm going to restart it because it doesn't register. So I'm going to restart it. Once it's restart, it's listening. Okay, how can I make the request? So to make a GET request, the easiest way to do it is through the browser. Whenever your browser goes to a link, it makes a GET request. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to my browser, and then I'm going to type in localhost, which is your own computer. If you want other people's computer, you have to type in like some sort of an IP address or a domain name, which is typically how it works when you go on websites. But a domain name essentially is just sort of an alias for an IP address under the hood. But because I'm using my own computer, I'm just going to do localhost. So that's my own computer, and then :3000, which means at port 3000. And then I'm not going to do / anything because it's the root directory. And if I send that request, the browser will send that request, and then I get the response. And then if I zoom in, you'll see here that the browser renders that text. And that's the browser's work, I think. Right, it puts it in the HTML format. But if you make a raw request, it just sends the text. So anyways, so now the request is /. Perfect. Now we have some sort of a running server. If we look at our server that's actually running, when I made that request, it actually logged that the request object, remember? So if I go back here, this is the log. So the logs will go in your server, obviously. So the request object has a bunch of stuff. You don't have to know most of them. We're going to interact with some of these properties in a bit. But that's essentially how this whole thing works. So maybe I want to like serve content for the website, right? So if I go in the actual website, if I go in the websites /index, and in here I see the website, and maybe I want like certain parts of this content to be like easily editable without having to hard code it in, right? So for example, maybe I would change this description a lot, or maybe I would change these as I learn new languages or whatever, right? This is just an example. Maybe I want, or maybe you're building a web application, right? A lot of sort of data that you want to get from that web application is going to be requested on the back end. And so how would you do that? So first of all, I need to serve the data on the back end. So I'm going to serve maybe a different description just to see that it's different. So I'm going to go to my backend, and I'm going to maybe say if you request, let's do the root URL. Doesn't really matter. And in here, I'm going to actually serve stuff. So I'm going to send a JSON format. And I realize I haven't actually explained JSON. JSON is just a data format that resembles JavaScript object. It stands for JavaScript object notation. And it resembles a JavaScript object, except that the properties have like have quotations around them. And the syntax is slightly more strict. So you need commas after every single property, unless it's the last one. But anyways, that's just the format for data. And so let's send an actual JSON data. So instead of login the request, I'm going to do res.json, which specifies I want to send back a JSON. And I'm going to pass it an object. And what it's going to do is going to change that object into a JSON. So, and then now you might wonder, why can't I just like send text that is the JSON? And the difference is that there are certain HTTP headers that will say that this is a JSON, and they will parse it accordingly. So anyways, JSON, and then this object, I'm going to say, this is content, right? So maybe I want the description to be, I don't know, description from the backend. And I'm going to restart the server. And then I'm going to go back, I'm going to request, and then you'll see here that I got JSON back. But I want to fetch it from the front end. And how you would do that is with JavaScript. JavaScript that's attached to the HTML. So if I go here, you see here that we have fetched the API, but I want to sort of do something different here. So maybe I will create another file. I'm going to name this, I'm going to actually rename this to maybe joke.js, and then I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it script.js. And in the HTML, I'm going to change this to the what it was before, which is joke.js, and then I'll create a new tag, and specify that the source is the script.js. So I'm attaching both of these JavaScript files. So now that I've attached the script.js, I can actually write JavaScript. So I'm going to actually fetch the data from the backend using client-side JavaScript. So I'm going to do I'm going to make an async function just so I can use the await. So I'm going to do async function get content, and in here I'm going to do a fetch request. So I'm going to do const. I'm going to store it in a res, just a response. I'm going to wait for the fetch, and in the fetch I'm going to specify the URL I'm fetching, so http://localhost at port 3000. This specifies the protocol, by the way. And once I have the response, I have to actually get the body. Now you might wonder why is the body not already in the response? And it's because the response body sort of streams in as you make your first request. So what you'll get here in the response is just a header. So I have to actually wait for the whole sort of body to load in. And because I have to wait for that, it's another asynchronous task. So I'm going to do const, and I'm going to finally name it content because that's the actual body. Const content equals to await res dot. And then I can actually get the body, but because I know the body is JSON, I'm going to actually parse the JSON. And what this does is it reads the JSON and it converts it into a JavaScript object that I can use. So now content is a JavaScript object. Now, of course, I don't really know what the shape of this object is. I don't really know what properties it has, but because I coded the backend, I know that it just has a description property, which is a string. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to do console.log content dot description. And you can see here that my code editor has no idea what I'm saying. That's because it has no idea what content is. And this is why in the future when I talk about TypeScript, it's going to help you a lot. But anyways, let's just see if it works. So if I go back, I go to the front end, I look at my console, and then I refresh. So when it loads, it's going to make that request. And it doesn't work because I haven't even called the function. So I have to actually call the function, and then I refresh, and you'll see here that it still doesn't work because it says here that access to fetch at this specific URL is not allowed because of something called CORS, which stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. And what that is a security measure that your browser already has. So what it sort of prevents you from, or what it prevents website from doing is they don't want websites to be writing scripts that can fetch data from anywhere. And the reason why that is because when you go to a website, the script automatically runs, and if anyone can just write script that requests anywhere, that's a huge security issue. So, so to prevent that, they'd say that if you fetch anything from the browser, I'm going to say that this request is from a specific origin, and it's going to ask permission for that server to say, okay, I made a request at this origin, and origin is just where it's from at this specific website. Do you allow it? And the server says no or yes. Server by default will say no, which is why we have to configure it in the server. So whenever you run into a CORS error, that is something you have to fix on the back end. You have to allow that in the back end, not the front end. So, so I'm going to go to my back end, and then I'm going to try and fix that. So maybe I want, like, I don't know, I want to allow all requests from everywhere. So I'm going to Google Express CORS, right? And you see here that we have an Express CORS middleware. And what a middleware is a thing that processes data that's between the request and the response. So this CORS middleware allows you to essentially parse, or not parse, but essentially allow cross-origin resource sharing, right? So it allows you to basically, allows the server to, it allows requests from multiple origins, essentially. So I have to install that, so I'm going to do npm install, install CORS, and then I'm going to import it and save it in the variable CORS. So I'm going to go back here, const CORS equals to require CORS. And so now that I have CORS, this is the middleware, and to use a middleware, I'm going to do, before I specify these GET requests, I'm going to do app.use, and in this app.use, I'm going to pass in the middleware that I want to use, so which is the CORS middleware. I'm going to call the actual function. So you can see here in the docs as well. So CORS, if you call the CORS function, it will return the actual CORS middleware, and then the app just uses it. You have to do this before you specify GET, because this will run when you make a request. It will sort of go through all these middleware and then go through these GET requests. So in fact, if you make another app.get with the root URL, this will run first. So the order matters. So anyway, so now I have CORS set up. If I save this, I'm going to restart the server. I'm going to go back to the front end, refresh, and now we have it. So now that we have the actual data from the front end script, let's actually change and replace that HTML content, which is something that's pretty easy to do, right? So if we go to the actual HTML, the description is in here, right? So maybe I want this descriptions, just so I can grab it from the HTML. I'm going to assign it to ID of description, save that, go back to the script. And then once I have the content, I want to first of all get the elements. So const description element equals to document.querySelector. This is all JavaScript, if you remember. I'm going to select the ID of description. And now that I have the element, I'm going to replace the content. So I'm going to do description element dot text content equals to the content dot description. Save that and see if it works. So if we go back here, you refresh, and you see here that we got the description in the back end rendered. So we did it from scratch. Okay. So like as you build more complex applications, it's going to look a lot more different. But under the hood, it's essentially what it's doing is fetching data from the back end and then rendering that somewhere on the HTML. So. But you see here that there's a slight flash, and that's because initially it's that content. So I'm just going to delete this original description, and then now it won't have that flash. But it does have like a slight delay because it has to fetch the content. But it doesn't make a huge difference. So anyways, and maybe I want some of these, right, to be rendered. So maybe in the app.js, I'm going to serve more content. So I'm going to say I want to serve like the languages, to be an array of, oh, I'm going to do a comma here, of maybe HTML, CSS, I don't know, Python, doesn't matter. And then I'm going to restart the server so it actually serves that. And then I know that if I request it now, I'm going to get content.languages. So maybe I want it to be rendered like here. And so I'm going to make this ID of languages. I'm actually going to delete all this because I'm going to put it in there afterwards. And then I'm going to grab the element. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to say languages element. And then I'm going to do the ID of languages. Once I have that element, I'm going to put LIs in that element. So I'm going to basically loop through every single language from the content. So to do that, I'm going to do content dot languages, and I know this is an array. So an array has a for each function, for each, and the for each function takes in a callback function that takes in the language that I'm currently at, and then now I can actually do something with it. So I want to, for every single language, I want to, first of all, create an li element. So to do that, I'm going to do const li equals to document.create element li. So this creates the li element. And then I'm going to put the content, which is the language, in the content of the li element. So I'm going to do li.textContent equals to language. And now that I have this li element with the actual text, I'm going to put it as a child of the language element, which is the ul. So I'm going to do languages element dot append child, and then I'm going to append the li. And then it's going to loop through every single one of those languages and do the same thing. So it's going to populate the ul with a bunch of li's underneath. So if I refresh, you see here HTML, CSS, Python, right? So what we've essentially built is a CMS, a very, very sort of rudimentary CMS. I'm going to show you in the future how to maybe make this a bit better. So in the future, we're essentially going to be building a full stack CMS, which means we're going to be storing the data in a database rather than hard coding it in our backend. And then when we have the content in the database, we can create a dashboard, and the dashboard is a front end with React. And then that dashboard is going to allow us to sort of edit content without needing to hard code it. So maybe you're creating a website for someone who doesn't have like technical skills. They just want a dashboard that they can edit the content in. That's what we're going to be building. So so that's pretty much it for the basics, but I haven't showed you how post requests work. So I'm going to do maybe on this app, if you do a post request on the root URL, and the same thing, right? Rec res, and then a function, and then console.log hello. Say that. I'm going to res.send you posted slash, right? And then, okay, but how do we make this post request, right? We know that by default, I'm going to restart the server. By default, the browser makes a GET request, so clearly I'm not getting it. So to make a post request, you can either do it in the command line or you can use a tool called Postman. It's an app, but it's also a thing that you could use on the browser. And what Postman allows you to do is send requests, send HTTP requests. So here you can actually specify the verb, right? So I'm going to do post, and then I'm going to do localhost 3000 at the root URL. And if I send that, I get you posted slash, and then I actually see the hello, right? So this is how you would test out your post requests. Postman is absolutely necessary if you're testing out, if you're building a backend, you need to test out the APIs. And so let's see how we can send data, right? So far we just request data, but how do we send data and like actually do something with that data? So to send data via a GET request, you can use query strings. And what they are is essentially whenever I make a GET request, I can change the URL by adding a question mark at the end and then specifying the data. So maybe I want like name to be equal to John and age equals to 23. And so name equals to John and age equals to 23. This all has to be after the question mark. That sends a query string. So that's a query string, and that sends data to that GET request. So far, it doesn't really do anything with the data, so I'm actually going to try and get that data. So I'm going to do console.log rec.query, which gets the query string. So I'm just going to log it on the server. I'm going to restart the server. I'm going to make another request, look at the server, and you'll see here that I actually get the request. I get the data. So all I did is just change the URL, pass in some data with the query string, and then I can access it with the rec.query. And then you can imagine you can do more stuff with it. If rec.query.name is equal to this, send that. Or if this equals to that, send that, right? The logic is all in here. So that's how you send data via GET request. But this is not very safe if you're doing like sensitive data. For example, if you want to send a request and the request needs to send the actual password to an account maybe, you wouldn't want your password to be here, right? If your password is, in here, it's all exposed in the URL and it's just not safe. So to send the more, I guess, discrete data that's not specifically on the URL, also it makes the URL just look ugly. So to send a more secret data, you need to post. And what post allows you to do is to put data inside your request body. That's the convention. Doesn't have to be that way, but that's typically how it's done because post, remember, GET is just reading stuff. Post is actually updating or like putting stuff in there. So you want to specify what you're putting in the database. So to do that, you make a post request in Postman, and then you can actually see I can change the body. And there are lots of formats that you may want to send it in. I'm just going to send in a raw JSON. So maybe I want the name to be John and then age to be 23. So that's JSON. I send that. Actually, nothing happens, of course, because I haven't actually edited the post request. So if I go back to the post request, and then I can access it via the rec.body, request.body. And in fact, I'm just going to change that to this. I'm just going to send you back what you gave me. And so if I go back and actually restart the server, send the request, and you see here that I get nothing. And the reason why is because the server needs to be able to actually parse the body. And to do that, we need another middleware. And the middleware is express.json. And what this will do is on every single request, it will use this middleware and it will see if there's JSON body, and it will parse that and then put it in the rec body. And so if I restart the server now, make another request, and you'll see here that it just sends me back what I sent. So you can imagine, again, you can use rec.body something else, make some logic, change the database somehow. That's all up to you. So this is a very, very, very powerful thing. And the general sort of pattern that you want to have is on the back end, you typically want to handle more secret stuff. So for example, accessing the database. To access the database, you need like a secret password. You want to store that in the back end because whatever you put on the front end is all exposed. Or maybe you want to do authentication, right? You need a back end. Anything that you don't want to be exposed, you would want a back end. Or if you're doing very heavy logic that you don't want to be calculated fully on the front end, if you're doing some machine learning stuff, or you're calling a bunch of APIs and aggregating them together, maybe that's just simply not suitable for this, right? For the front end JavaScript. So that's all a server is. And again, a server does not have to be written in JavaScript. It can be written in anything else as well. So that's essentially how a backend server works. We haven't gone over like a lot. There's still a bunch to explore, but you sort of get the basics. And so yeah. So there is on top of HTTP, there is a convention called REST APIs. And APIs is it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's kind of hard to define, but what it is essentially an interface between two programs. An interface is like a thing that allows two things to communicate with each other. So it's a thing that allows two programs to communicate with each other. And so what REST APIs are, REST stands for representational state transfer, and it doesn't really matter too much, but what it essentially is a convention where if you use get, it reads, post, updates, put updates, post, add, delete, deletes some sort of content on the database. And it is typically stateless, so every single request has all the information it needs. It doesn't sort of like know who you are, so to speak. It can't keep track of what you have previously requested. So each request is individual and isolated. And yeah, so that's essentially what REST APIs are. But on the next tutorial, we're going to learn about MongoDB, and we're going to learn how to actually communicate with the database, so we don't have to hard code our content on the back end. And then we're going to learn about React, which is sort of this whole process of getting the element, updating the content. This is fine if it's just like a few elements, but if this is like a lot of content and a very complex web application, this is going to be really, really hard to sort of read. So React sort of helps you with that. And after that, we're pretty much done with full stack. So yeah, that's pretty much it for backend. Hopefully it's been informative, and I hope to see you guys next week.